Thank you. Thank you all. As a former Rotarian, I appreciate good work Rotary provides all over the world. By the way, this little clicker, I make sure that I'm not kicked out of here, so I have time for 25 minutes. My presentation today will have three subjects. My impressions today, South Korea, 2 observations about the Korean War, and some personal experiences. I have a lot to cover, and I've been allowed 25 minutes to tell my story, so I'll try to finish before you all head for the exits. You have handouts, of all the battles during the war, and maps of the Korean Peninsula. Now I have a map here on the wall, but it's probably difficult for you all to see, so as I point to this map, you can follow me along on the maps on each of your tables. Additional photos are on the display table, and my card if anyone would like to invite me to meet with any organization or youth group in hearing about this important event in our American history. First of all, let me call your attention to the map of the Korean Peninsula. Again, I recognize you all can't see it from where you are, but take a look at it on your table. As I point out locations of some maps of some battles and events, you can follow along on the maps at your table. Joe mentioned I'm a member of a veterans group who visit local high schools and share our experiences. I believe our younger generation should hear about the courage and sacrifices of our soldiers in previous wars. For many years, South Korea has sponsored revisit programs for Korean veterans to thank them for the economic success, freedom, and economic success of their country. There were 120 veterans in our group, including family members. I have a photo of our group on the display table, and by the way, altogether it must have been about 300. All expenses paid by the government of South Korea, food, lodging, tour guides, etc. After the arms were signed, July 27th, 1953, I was able to enter Seoul. All I could see, the city of ashes and smoke. I don't think I saw a building over 3 or 4 stories. Jerry, you want to show a photo of the Seoul in 1953? Can you all see it okay? One before that. There you can see, illustrates the destruction of Seoul after city changed 4 times. First by the North Koreans, then by the Chinese, and twice by UN forces. Next photo is of 2 young girls. The reason I have this shown today, photo illustrates a side effect of the Korean War, which resulted in over 100,000 orphans. Next is a photo of Seoul skyline. You can see the contrast between Seoul 1953 and Seoul 2013. It's a dramatic contrast between what they have done in the last 60 years. I have a photo of Seoul today on a book on display, and you have time after the meeting, you're welcome to browse through it. One example of the economic miracle in South Korea is that when the war ended, they only had 1 bridge standing, still intact. Now they have 23 bridges. Amazing design and architecture. We have a problem building 1 bridge between Oregon and Washington. Jerry, you want to show the photo of the map, of the bridge rather? You can see the marvelous architecture and design of the bridge. An important event we attended was the anniversary of General MacArthur's successful amphibious landing in Incheon on September 15th, 1950. And on the map, I have Incheon on the west side coast of Korea, a little west of Seoul, the capital of Seoul. I don't think Steven Spielberg could have directed a more dramatic reenactment of the landing. There were Navy ships, landing crafts, helicopters, hundreds of soldiers and paratroopers participating in the ceremony. And Jerry, if you show a photo of the paratroopers landing on the beach. Very impressive. Next is a photo of the grandstand. And please note, on top of the grandstand are signs both in English and in Korean. We were escorted to our seats by young Korean Girl Scouts who took the hand of each of the veterans and led us to our seat in the grandstands. It was a very emotional sign of friendship by South Korea. Just picture this, a bunch of 80-year-old veterans being led by 13-year-old girls to their seats. It was marvelous. Here's the photo of the Girl Scouts. sitting behind me in the grandstands. They're cute. You may wonder why South Korea places so much emphasis on their military. Keep in mind, the arms with ceasefire. However, no peace treaty was ever signed, which means the war has not officially ended. Seoul is just 25 miles from the North Korean border. A sobering thought, given the fact the North Korea military is deployed a few miles north of the border. That explains why today South Korea has the 6th largest and most efficient army in the world. Last week we traveled to Panmunjom at the Demilitarized Zone, acronym DMZ. If you show the DMZ, Jerry. This is the most heavily defended national border in the world. There are armed South Korean soldiers stationed all along the DMZ. You know, we still have 30,000 Americans stationed in South Korea, so that North Korea understands that the United States is committed to support South Korea. We were not permitted to take any photos in the American zone, however, okay, take photos outside and inside the huts. And here's a photo of the North Korean headquarters at Panmunjom. If you can't see it perhaps on this photo, but there's a North Korean guard. He's looking down at us and we're looking back at him. Very weird. Next photos of my wife and myself inside one of the huts. This is where the negotiations were held. Please note the UN flag and also that South Honor Guard standing next to us. These guys are marvelous. They stood at attention for hours. I understand they're all black belt graduates. And by the way, the average height of the South Korean soldier is 3 or 4 inches taller than the North Korean soldiers, and obviously because of better nutrition in South Korea than in North Korea. Now we'll pause for a moment, not to distract from some briefs here. I'd like to review the war. There were 4 stages. I'm briefly going to go over a 3-year war in a few minutes here. First stage, the Battle of Pusan Perimeter. And on the map, if you look on your map, the bottom of the peninsula, and around it is what we call the Pusan Perimeter. After crossing the 30th parallel and capturing Seoul, the North Korean army pushed the South Korean army down the outskirts of Pusan on the bottom of your map. And this is where U.S. troops in early July 1950 arrived to support the South Korean army. As a result of a peacetime budget in 1950, our military were not prepared for war and committed our soldiers to battle under strength, ill-equipped, and not well trained. They were not prepared to fight a guerrilla war against the Russian-trained North Korean army. And by the way, as a side note, this week the Defense Department has announced plans again to shrink the military to peacetime levels. Most of these early troops were recent draftees and for the first time experiencing the realities of war. However, they were still able to halt North Korean advance as the North Koreans were very close to capturing the entire country. But at a heavy cost. 46 Americans lost their lives in this battle along the Pusan Perimeter, as I just pointed out. Another fact not well known is that North Korea did not honor the Geneva Code of Conduct in the treatment of prisoners. Hundreds of American troops who were captured during those early days, battles were tortured and massacred by the North Koreans. This is pointed on page 2 of the handout, the dates, August 17th, September 19th, October 9th, 20th, and 23rd. Second stage of the war, amphibious landing at the port city of Incheon. This is where we attend that major and exciting ceremony. As our forces were having a difficult time down at Pusan Perimeter, because of the larger North Korean army, General MacArthur planned to reverse the direction of the war. And months later, he conducted a surprise amphibious landing at Incheon. The Marines were able to cut off all the equipment and supplies going from North Korea down to their troops along the Pusan Perimeter, fighting our troops. No other nation in the world could have had the means and knowledge to put together 200 ships, land 70,000 troops successfully. At this time, a well-equipped and better trained U.S. troops were able to recapture Seoul, and within weeks, the majority of the North Korean army either surrendered or were killed. Incheon landing changed the whole course of the war and is recognized as one of the most brilliant moves in American military history. South Koreans, you wonder why I had this big ceremony. South Koreans realized a great deal of importance on this venture as was displayed in the ceremony we attended. They realized that without that venture, without that landing, they would have lost the war. Pure and simple. And now up to the third stage of the war, China intervention. In late November 1950, China came to the aid of North Korea, and 300,000 Chinese troops in mass infiltration crossed the Chinese border into Korea and began an attack on UN forces. And you probably can't see this on the map, but China up here crossed the border, the Yalu River, into North Korea. By the way, the 90% of UN forces were Americans. Among the first targets of the Chinese were Marine units located along the Chosin Reservoir. And on your map, you look at the upper right-hand corner of North Korea, you can see I've circled Chosin Reservoir. The battles took place one of the coldest Korean winters on record, and one of two major winter battles in the 20th century. Not only were the Marines outnumbered, but they had survived sub-zero temperature, 30, 35 degrees below zero, wind chill factor of 100 degrees freezing. On page 3 of the handouts are details of the battles. Of the 25,000 troops who faced the Chinese at the Chosin Reservoir in just 17 days, at least 3,000 were killed, 6,000 wounded, and many more suffered severe frostbite or just froze to death. On east end of the reservoir, 120,000 Chinese surrounded a small 7-division task force of 2,500 troops before reinforcements could reach them. As a result, 1,000 were killed, 1,500 were found, the 15 wounded and frostbitten were able to make it back to American lines, and the remains of the fallen still lie unmarked in North Korea. You know, these numbers may not sink in, but put them in perspective. Compare 4,000 killed in 17 days compared to 3,500 killed in a 10-year war in Iraq. Next is a photo of the weather conditions. These are soldiers in line. These are soldiers on a line of fire, and this will give you an idea of the weather conditions at the Chosin Reservoir. A Marine officer recalled he had to constantly walk the line of gun emplacements to force soldiers to keep moving to prevent freezing. Lethargy was a death sentence. Remaining Army and Marine units were forced to retreat 67 miles to the Hangnam Harbor on the East Coast, where ships are waiting to relocate them to South Korea. You can't see it on your, you probably can't see it here, but if you look at your map, it's on the East Coast of Korea, 67 miles. The Marines had to handle both severe cold and Chinese snipers along the route. Another reason for the delay is the combat code of the U.S. military that we don't abandon our dead or wounded on the battlefield. The only exception has been Benghazi recently. In order to fit dead soldiers on the trucks, the Marines had to break arms and legs. This is a side effect of war that you won't see in the movies. Not well known, as 100,000 North Korean civilians who were reluctant to live under communism were escorted by the Marines and taken aboard Navy ships. First time in history, U.S. Navy ships ever took civilians during wartime. Today, there were 1 million descendants of these 100,000 North Korean refugees. The Chinese army has now increased to 500,000. And because of these overpowering numbers, the UN commanders decided to withdraw the entire force from North Korea back down to 38th parallel. And that's where the battle lines are, along the 38th parallel. You can see it on your map, and you can see here, start back where we started. Now, if we pause for a moment, Jerry, I want to go into the next stage, which is the fourth and final stage of the war, truce negotiations and battle for hills. In June 1951, Joseph Malik, the Soviet delegate to the UN, made proposed truce negotiations, and both North Korea and China agreed, accepted. The talks were difficult and lasted for 2.5 years. I don't have time to go into all the reasons why it took so long, but it did. A ceasefire agreement was not included in the negotiations until the armistice was finally signed on July 27, 1953. The omission was very important because, as pointed out, if you look at page 1 on your handout, upper left-hand corner of page 1, 46% of American casualties occurred after truce talks in 1951, not before. The Chinese took advantage of the slow pace of the hills in order to occupy as many hills as possible in order to influence the negotiations. At this stage, a static war developed similar to World War I, and UN forces fought to keep the hills they held, fighting for hills like Bloody Ridge, Little Gibraltar, Jackson Heights, T-Bone, Pork Chop, Outpost Harry were very costly. 30,000 Americans lost their lives. During the fourth stage of this fourth stage of the war is when I ended up in Korea. By the way, I would like to point out that unlike today's volunteers, we were mostly young civilians who were drafted during the Korean War. I know some of you came up to me before the meeting, and Korean veterans, you understand that. As I tell the high school students, this was a grandparents' war. We were young and not much older than today's high school seniors. After basic training, I was invited to attend anti-aircraft officers candidate school at Fort Bliss, Texas. This sounded a lot more appealing than going to an infantry OCS school. So I accepted. And after graduation, I was assigned to the headquarters Air Defense Command located in Philadelphia, Swarthmore College outside of Philadelphia. Now let me tell you, back then, Swarthmore College was a very upscale, all-girls college. Now here I am, a brand new young second lieutenant, being stationed at all-girls college. Let me tell you, this was not bad duty. However, early in 1953, the war is still going on, and I received orders I was being transferred to Korea. When I arrived in Korea, I was informed the enemy aircraft was no longer a threat, and said I was needed as an artillery forward observer. I explained to my superiors, I had no training about the duties of a forward observer. They said, no problem, Lieutenant. This would be on-the-job training. And they assigned an experienced sergeant to my unit. I was told the reason for this assignment was because they needed a replacement. I asked, well, who am I replacing? I was informed there was a shortage of forward observers because of heavy casualties. Now put yourself in my shoes and you're getting this kind of instructions. How do you feel about things? I was issued a .45 revolver, a carbine, a flat jacket. The flat jacket, I was puzzled by that. And assigned to the 7th Infantry Division stationed along the 30th parallel, facing the Chinese on a hill nicknamed Old Baldy. I arrived at my outpost called Westview. That sounds more like a timeshare than an outpost, but that's the name of the outpost I was at. Now, the next photo is a photo of Old Baldy. And Old Baldy was not occupied by the Chinese after the UN unit was ordered to retreat because of heavy casualties. The hill got the name because there was a series of 5 battles for Baldy because of its higher elevation. And as you can see, few trees or bushes still growing. My responsibility was to protect our positions from Chinese infiltration. My outpost was almost daily shelled by artillery and mortars by the Chinese on Baldy. The Chinese realized that knocking out observation posts like mine meant eliminating our ability to fire on them. Fortunately, I missed the freezing cold winters. However, during the summer months, we endured blistering heat, stench, monsoon rains, and life in the bunkers. Looking back on my experiences, the responsibilities that's placed and young forward observers like me was really interesting. One call from me on a field radio could bring in more destructive power than an entire infantry battalion. Jerry, you show the next photo of shells landing on Old Baldy. This is shells landing on Old Baldy. Now these photos I'm taking of Old Baldy and shells landing, I took with my Eastman Kodak Browning camera. Now I go to the high schools, I have to explain to students what the Kodak Browning camera looked like. It was not a smartphone. Students often ask me if I ever killed anyone. I have to be careful in how I answer that, and I tell them I have no idea how many Chinese became casualties or American lives saved as a result of my duties. I never even pulled the trigger. I simply said, fire for effect. Here's a photo, next photo of my outpost. And this photo of my outpost was taken after the ceasefire was signed. Otherwise, it had been too dangerous to stand on top of the bunker. You can see the sandbags to absorb incoming artillery, trenches to protect us from sniper fire, and barbed wire to protect us from infiltration. Please note on page 5 of the handouts next, July 6th, the battle on Pork Chop Hill. This was a battle filled with sights and sounds I will never forget. Pork Chop Hill was located a short distance to my right, and on the night of July the 6th, I was startled to hear loudspeakers and bugles blowing as moving carpet Chinese swarmed up the hill. In perfect English, the Chinese were on their loudspeakers, telling our troops to surrender, or if not, we were all going to die. I don't know, no words can describe what a horrific spectacle I observed. There was hand-to-hand combat, and it was indescribable hell. I don't know about their culture, why the Chinese are so willing to fight to the death. After only 5 days of fighting, 5 days, the casualties in the pork chop include 243 killed, 916 wounded, and 163 of our fallen have never been recovered since pork chop today is now located in North Korean territory. The Chinese had no strategic or tactical purpose to occupy pork chop except to influence the truce talks. A few weeks later, after the pork chop battle, I was promoted to first lieutenant, reassigned to radar observation where I tracked the incoming mortar fires. Considering my personal experience, I was very fortunate because I could have been a forward observer in pork chop. Another reason for my good fortune was I was told 74 hours prior to the ceasefire there was a firefight on my former outpost, Westview, and my replacement was killed. I'm guessing the young officer who replaced me had just arrived in Korea and probably did not believe the Chinese would attack the day before the armistice was signed and was not expecting an infiltration. I have no idea why the Chinese attacked this outpost so close to the armistice unless they thought I was still the FO there. On the last page of the handouts, please note the observation by Eric Severide made 60 years ago. He points out that even though the involvement in the Korean War was unpopular with politicians, our young soldiers fought long and hard. It was the bloodiest war in which Americans were engaged in the 20th century. More American young men died more often and faster than any war except our Civil War. And to answer the question, what did the war accomplish? My answer is we stopped the spread of communism in Asia and prevented South Korea from being occupied by North Korea. As a result, today, South Korea is the economic powerhouse, while North Korea, the most corrupt regime in the world, has chronic food shortages and massive starvation. At the high schools, I like to show students before and after photos. Here's a photo of when I just graduated OCS school and on my way to Swarthmore College. Next photo. Here's the same guy after a tour of duty in Korea. Please notice a change in demeanor between the two. One was happy-go-lucky, one a little more cynical about things. And finally, my Korean hat. Where was this hat made? Made in China. 60 years ago, I was calling artillery on Chinese Loken no Baldi. Today, I'm wearing their hat. When Korean veterans return home, there are no parades, no big events, no wall-to-wall coverage. My presentation today is about forgotten soldiers and forgotten battles and a forgotten war. God bless America, and thank you very much.